In November 1942, a Soviet radio operator transmitted coordinates from an encircled position in Stalingrad for 11 consecutive days. On the 12th day, the transmission stopped mid-word. When Soviet forces reached his position weeks later, they found the radio. They did not find him. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted 200 days. It consumed 1 million Soviet soldiers, 250,000 Germans, and a city of 500,000 people. It was the largest, bloodiest, most documented land battle in human history. Historians have written 10,000 books about it. Soviet archives contain 40 million pages of records from the battle. The German side produced another 20 million. Every regiment, every division, every major engagement, recorded, analyzed, mapped. So when something disappears from the record of Stalingrad, it disappears in spite of the most thorough documentation effort in military history. It disappears because someone made it disappear, or because what happened was something the documentation had no category for. Today, we follow the 11 days of transmissions from a position in the Stalingrad factory district in November 1942. 11 days that saved hundreds of Soviet lives, and one man who sent those transmissions and then ceased to exist in any record, any archive, any testimony that has ever been made public. His name was Senior Sergeant Pavel Ilyich Morozov. He was 26 years old. And 11 days after the Germans surrounded his position, he stopped transmitting in the middle of a word. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows where he went. And the file that might answer both questions is sealed until 2035. To understand what Morozov was doing, you need to understand what Stalingrad looked like in November 1942. The city had been reduced to rubble. Not metaphorically, literally. The Luftwaffe had dropped 1 million bombs on Stalingrad in the first weeks of the battle. What had been a city of 500,000 people was now a landscape of collapsed buildings, flooded basements, and street-by-street fighting so intense that the average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier arriving in the city was 24 hours. The factory district in the north of the city was among the worst of it. 3 massive factories, the Barakati gun factory, the Red October steel plant, and the tractor factory, had become fortresses. The Soviets held parts of them. The Germans held other parts. In some cases, opposing forces held different floors of the same building. And in this landscape, men like Pavel Morozov were the central nervous system of Soviet resistance. A radio operator in Stalingrad was not a support role. He was not behind the lines. There were no lines. A radio operator in Stalingrad sat in a ruined building, often alone or nearly alone, and transmitted coordinates, troop movements, and artillery targeting data to Soviet command across the Volga River. Without that information, Soviet artillery on the eastern bank fired blind. With it, they could hit German positions with enough precision to hold the factory district against forces that outnumbered them 3-1. Radio operators were therefore the highest priority target for German snipers, German patrols, and German intelligence. The average survival time of a radio operator in the Stalingrad factory district in the autumn of 1942 was 4 days. Pavel Morozov lasted 47. He was from Voronezh. A city boy, the son of a factory engineer, which is perhaps why he had an instinct for machinery, for the particular language of frequencies and codes that other men never quite learned. His pre-war record shows he qualified as a radio operator in 6 weeks when the standard course took 3 months. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Grigory Savin, wrote in a field report in October 1942, a report that survived and is publicly available, that Morozov had, quote, an almost supernatural ability to maintain transmission discipline under fire. What that meant in practice was this. When German artillery was targeting his position, when the building around him was collapsing section by section, Morozov did not stop transmitting. He moved his equipment if he had to. He transmitted from different positions within the same ruined building. He changed frequencies when the Germans began jamming him. He kept the signal alive. For 47 days, he kept the signal alive. And then his position was encircled. On November 14, 1942, German forces completed a pincer movement that cut off a section of the WWII factory district. Several hundred Soviet soldiers were encircled. Among them, Pavel Morozov and his radio equipment. Standard protocol in this situation was clear. If encircled, transmit what you can for as long as you can, then destroy the equipment to prevent capture, then attempt breakout or hold position until relief. Morozov followed the first part of this protocol with a precision that commanders on the eastern bank of the Volga later described as remarkable. What he transmitted over the next 11 days was not desperate or erratic. It was methodical, professional, detailed. These transmissions survive in the Soviet military archive. I have read them. They are extraordinary documents. Day 1, November 14, 0942. German armor concentration. Grid reference 447-C. Minimum 6 vehicles. Requesting artillery support. Signal strength, good. Day 2, November 15, 1417. German infantry movement through Factory Hall 3, northeast corner. Approximately 2 companies. We are holding. Ammunition adequate for 72 hours. Day 3, November 16, 0755. Artillery strike on grid 447-C. Confirmed effective. German armor withdrawn. New concentration forming at 451-A. Transmitting coordinates. Day 5, November 18, 2230. Night movement. German patrol approached our position from the south. Repelled. 2 of our men wounded. Requesting medical guidance. No medic present. Day 7, November 20th, 11:04. Ammunition critical. Food situation manageable. Water from building cistern. Transmitter functioning. We are still here. Day 9, November 22nd, 1933. Something I need to report. Will transmit details when secure. Continue artillery support grid 458-B. Morozov. Day 11, November 24th, 6:17. The men are gone. I don't. Transmission ends. That last transmission ends in the middle of a word. The signal cuts. Not jamming. The frequency analysis in the archive shows a clean cut, consistent with the operator stopping rather than external interference. He stopped transmitting. In the middle of a sentence. In the middle of a word. And then nothing. For the remaining weeks of the battle, position WWII 7 was silent. Let me go back to day 9. Because that transmission, something I need to report, will transmit details when secure, is the transmission that researchers have focused on for 30 years. He never transmitted those details. Whatever he needed to report, he never reported it. The archive contains a follow-up query from Soviet command, sent 2 hours after the Day 9 transmission. WWII 7, please clarify your previous message. What do you need to report? Morozov did not respond to that query. He responded the following morning with routine artillery coordinates, as if the previous transmission had not happened. Command asked again. He did not address it again. On day 11, 6 words and a broken sentence. Then silence. Soviet forces reached the Barricade 7 position in late January 1943, after the German surrender at Stalingrad. What they found was consistent with what you would expect from 11 weeks of winter combat in a ruined building. Except for 3 things. First, the radio equipment was intact, not destroyed, not damaged, still functional. Standard protocol required destruction before abandonment. Morozov had not destroyed it. Second, the positions of the other men in the encirclement, their equipment, their personal effects, evidence of their presence, were found. Morozov's personal effects were not. His pack, his identification documents, his personal photograph of his family that his commanding officer noted him carrying, none of it was there. Third, on the wall of the room where the radio equipment sat, scratched into the plaster, 4 words in Russian. Ne ищите меня здесь. Don't look for me here. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Pavel Morozov transmitted for 11 days from an encircled position, saved hundreds of lives, then left 4 words on a wall and disappeared. Do you think he chose to disappear? Or do you think something happened to him? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe if you're new. These stories take weeks to find. Let's continue. There are 3 serious explanations for what happened to Pavel Morozov. I'm going to give each one the same attention because the honest answer is that the evidence does not clearly favor any of them. They are equally possible. They lead to completely different conclusions about what kind of story this is. Version 1. He was captured. The most straightforward explanation is German capture. Morozov's position was encircled. German forces were actively hunting radio operators. It is entirely possible that on the morning of November 24th, a German patrol reached him before he could complete his transmission or destroy his equipment. The evidence against this, German prisoner records from the Stalingrad campaign, are among the most complete of any theater of the war. Soviet prisoners taken in the factory district in November 1942 are documented in detail. Pavel Ilyich Morozov, senior sergeant, radio operator, does not appear in any German prisoner record from Stalingrad or from any subsequent camp. German intelligence would have had significant interest in a radio operator who had been transmitting for 47 days without capture. They would have documented him. They would have interrogated him extensively. There would be a file. There is no file. His name appears nowhere in German records. This doesn't make capture impossible. Records were lost. Records were destroyed. But it makes it harder to accept as a complete explanation. Version 2. He defected. This is the version that the Soviet state, when it eventually acknowledged the anomaly at all, appeared most concerned about. The sealed file, the one closed until 2035, was classified under a category used specifically for cases involving potential collaboration with enemy forces. The circumstantial case for defection is not nothing. By day 11, Morozov's men were gone. He was alone. He had been in an encircled position for 11 days with no relief coming. The Soviet command across the Volga had used his transmissions effectively, but had not broken through to reach him. He had transmitted, "The men are gone," as his last coherent words. A man alone, abandoned by his own side, facing death in a ruined building. The argument goes that he made a calculation and walked out with his hands up. The evidence against this is the same as against capture. He doesn't appear in German records. A defecting Soviet radio operator in November 1942 would have been an intelligence asset of enormous value. The Germans would not have lost track of him. And then there is the classification category. The Soviet file sealed until 2035 was not classified as a defection case. It was classified under a different category entirely. A category that researchers have been unable to identify because its code designation does not appear in any other declassified Soviet military archive. It is a code that was used exactly once, for this file. Version 3. Something else. Day 9. Something I need to report. Will transmit details when secure. He never transmitted those details. But the day before that transmission, Day 8, there is a gap in the log. A 6-hour gap during which Morozov transmitted nothing. This was unusual. His transmission discipline throughout the 11 days was consistent and regular. 6 hours of silence on Day 8 is anomalous. Researchers who have studied the transmission logs have noted that after Day 8, something changes in the transmissions. Not in their content. The artillery coordinates remain accurate, the military information remains professional, but in their tone. Before Day 8, Morozov's transmissions include occasional personal notes. Brief, but human. We are holding. Ammunition adequate. Transmitter functioning. We are still here. After Day 8, those human notes disappear. The transmissions become purely functional. Coordinates. Grid references. No personal voice. As if the person sending them had changed. Or as if the person sending them had seen something on Day 8 that made the human notes seem beside the point. I want to be precise about what I am and am not saying here. I am not claiming the supernatural. I am not claiming a Stalingrad ghost story. I am pointing to a documented anomaly in a transmission record and noting that the most obvious explanations for it have significant evidentiary problems. What happened in the 6 hours of silence on Day 8 in a ruined building in the Barakati factory district? What did Pavel Morozov need to report but never reported? Why does his file use a classification code that appears nowhere else in 40 million pages of Soviet military archive? And why is that file sealed for 93 years? The standard classification period for Soviet military documents from the Second World War is 50 years. 50 years was considered sufficient to protect any operational, intelligence, or personnel information that required protection. This file was given 93 years. Someone in the Soviet military bureaucracy, at some point between 1943 and the archival classification process, decided that whatever is in this file requires 43 additional years of protection beyond the standard. That decision was made by a person who read the file, who knew what was in it, and who decided it needed to stay sealed until 2035. Pavel Morozov's last confirmed communication was 6 words and a broken sentence at 6:17 on November 24, 1942. The men are gone. I don't. That is everything he left in the official record. That and 4 words scratched into plaster. Don't look for me here. I think about what it means to write that on a wall. Not, I am going to try to break out. Not, I am surrendering. Not, I am dead. Something more deliberate than any of those. A specific instruction, addressed to whoever comes next, telling them not to look in this place, implying there is somewhere else to look, implying he knew where he was going, implying a choice. A man who had transmitted through 47 days of the most intense urban combat in history, who had kept his discipline when the building around him was collapsing, who had never, in 11 days of encirclement, allowed panic or despair to enter his transmissions. That man scratched 4 words into a wall and walked into whatever came next. His family was told he died in combat at Stalingrad. His mother applied 3 times between 1945 and 1963 for information about where he was buried. Each application was returned with the same notation: location of remains unknown, case closed. She died in 1971 not knowing. His file remains sealed for 9 more years. In 2035, if the Russian state honors the classification timeline, someone will open it. I don't know what they'll find. 3 possible explanations, none of them complete. A 6-hour silence. A transmission that ends mid-word. 4 words on a wall. And a classification code that was used exactly once, for exactly this case, by someone who decided that whatever Pavel Morozov encountered in that ruined building in November 1942 required 93 years of protection. 9 more years. I'll be watching. Sources and further reading are in the description. The transmission logs, the save and field report, and the archival classification records are all linked. If you made it this far, thank you. Subscribe if you're new. There are more stories where this one came from. And if you ever find yourself alone in a ruined building with a radio, don't stop transmitting.